Hello, everyone. This is Evie Lupine. Welcome back. And today we are having our second episode of the interview series that we have been doing courtesy of KinkFest. And today we are going to be talking to Shay and Stefanos, two of my favorite BDSM educators. I've taken multiple classes from them. They are such a joy to be around. And today I'm going to be talking to them about play partners, how did you pick up play, and how to have a successful time going to the dungeon. So first, I would like to have Shay and Stefanos introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your experience in BDSM, and then how long you've been educating for, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. I'll just start. I'm Shay. I'm excited to be on the show, so thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. So we've been doing kink and educating since about 2005, which I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like so long ago now. And we have been moved to San Francisco 2005, started hosting events here and teaching classes as well. A lot of our classes focus on either bondage or beginning type of play, teaching people. We do a lot of work with orientations and getting people who are newer to the community some information on how to fit into a public kind of kink environment in a play space rather than, their bedroom. And bigger events, kind of the etiquette around that. And so we've done a lot of work in that area. In terms of our own dynamic, we have a DS, a dominant submissive dynamic between the two of us that we've been in since 2003-ish. And I always lose track of dates. I'm like, dates. And I think that's kind of the beginning intro.
That all sounds great to me. That was maybe my first experience seeing either one of you was, I think, last year in maybe February or March. I was actually in San Francisco, and I went to one of the dungeons where you do the introductions at for orientations. I thought it was such a great orientation, and I've been in the community for a couple years at that point, so I kind of already got it, but I could tell there were a lot of new people there, and I think it just really helped people know, okay, this is actually how a dungeon works, as opposed to, you've never been to one before. You don't really know what to expect. You don't really know how people are actually going to interact because, hey, it's not like we have TV shows about this where people can
Right.
can figure out what it's going to look like. So where I would like to start our conversation today is, so before you actually get to the dungeon, before you actually get to the point where you're talking to other people, how would you recommend finding a reputable dungeon to go to, a reputable convention or house party?
Stefanos, are you still with us? Do you want to
Yes,
start with
I
that?
am. I am. I just thought to myself, how would I find that? Well, in the joyous Bay Area where we live, that one's real easy. You just search a couple of websites and you can find anything. I think though, if you're talking across America, I think what you need to start doing is you need to find a series of references to find the sort of local environments and the local spaces. And the first thing that I often did when you do that is, there happens to, there's FetLife and Facebook and other great resources that you can use to find local dungeons and local places. We discovered back in 2005 and continuing forward, actually just searching BDSM play space with your local town or state actually performs a really great search. And then you want to take your time after that and figure out, when you use the word reputable, I'm assuming you mean safe, I'm assuming you mean known, I'm assuming you mean a bunch of things that might go with that. And so I think at that point, really the only thing you can do is either start asking other people on social media, as an example, because you might not have a person-to-person contact of what's going on, or find a local munch, which is what we did back in Minnesota in the day when we first started. We found a local munch and we went to it, and then people started telling us about their little house parties and their local spaces. And what we did is we went and we entered the space and looked and watched the first few times. We looked and observed what we saw, how people were interacting and the way in which they played with each other or interacted. That right there was my feeling of whether or not it was quote unquote reputable or the way I wanted to be part of it. And I enjoyed the freedom of that. And as far as, finding a conference goes, I mean, I think at this point, there's a lot of conferences that are across the country, and I find it difficult to find them all myself. Shay and I present at a number of different ones and have presented for quite some time, traveling around nationally and somewhat internationally as well. And I think what we've done is when we went to our first local ones, again by searching basically leather conference or BDSM conference, we did the same thing. We watched and enjoyed it. We support an awful lot of every year. We do a lot of things for Thunder in the Mountains, for Kink Fest, for some of the Dark Odyssey events. These are the ones that we continue to enjoy going to because we continue to enjoy their experience. But that doesn't mean they're best in the country. But we certainly make room on our calendar every year for them. So, we know pretty much every March we're going somewhere, up north. So we always hold that one. Shay, did you have any thoughts?
I agree with, what you said, of course. And I would say it's also a matter of just finding what fits for you, because of course it's not a matter of, in some cases, there may be, this person throws house parties and it's not a safe environment because they don't screen and they don't pay attention to, consent, and they don't kick people out who are problematic. There certainly could be those situations that happen. A lot of times it's much more about finding a space that fits with your energy and a space that, is just compatible with what you're looking for, who you're looking to meet. And so, when we talk about meeting people in the kink community, we talk about the first step being be where the people you want to meet are. You're always going to have better luck, if you're trying to meet someone, if you're trying to connect. The first step is putting yourself out there, which means, risking rejection to some extent. It certainly means having to get up off your couch and, no more Netflix and chill tonight, unless that means, unless you're using that as a euphemism. But you have to be willing to go out there and, explore the different events. And, if a certain event you go and it doesn't seem like a fit, it doesn't seem like there's, the people that you want to meet there, then that's still you've learned something, and that's still a victory. And you have to just be willing to try multiple different ones and find the right fit. Even locally in San Francisco, we have several different clubs. Even at the same club, different nights are going to have a lot different flavor. And for a lot of people who don't have, here we're very lucky. We have huge public, relatively public dungeons where anybody can come. You don't have to be a member. You just Google it on the internet and you come some night when we're open. And that's really all there is. In a lot of places, like Stefanos was saying, you have to go to a munch, you have to meet some people. Maybe it's all private parties. You have to kind of get invitations. And so that process is a bit different. And it depends, where you're at in the country and, how public the scene can be. Some of it depends on the laws locally, that kind of thing.
I know in my experience, I really think it is people, once you figure out, you can just literally, in this day and age, you can just Google, Phoenix BDSM club or, St. Paul BDSM club, and then actual results will come up and you'll find real things. I think once you get to that realization where it's BDSM is actually a thing that is some publicly acceptable enough to where you can search for it on Google and you will get actual results for it. I think the bigger hump is more just getting the courage to get out there and do it. And that's not even something that's exclusive to BDSM. I think that's people have that when they're wanting to learn or participate in any new hobby. If they want to join a local soccer club, or if they want to start doing yoga, or they, want to just do something else. It's just, I'm nervous. I'm not going to know anybody. And I don't know anything yet. So nobody's going to want to play with me or do this thing with me. Really just getting the courage and just going once and having an experience can, I agree, be really informative and help either is this something that you do want to continue to do publicly and seek out elsewhere, even if your energy didn't really match there, or no, this really seems like it's too much for you and maybe you'll just keep it at home and maybe not go out publicly.
I think another thing that people need to consider when they're venturing out to conferences and play spaces, whether they be friendly or not, well-known or a conference or just someone's house party, is I think one of the things they need to recognize is that you have to have an expectation when you go. So if your expectation is that tonight I'm going to go and I'm going to meet a hot person and I'm going to get laid and I'm going to play, and it's your very first time, that may be an unrealistic expectation.
Yes, yes. Setting good expectations is also very important.
Correct. And also the BDSM groups that are around the country and around the world, in the cases where we've been too, view themselves as a community. And what that really means is that they have their own standards and their own ways in which they work together. So it's not like popping by a local yoga class or popping into a local racquetball court or tennis court. You're actually meeting a group of people who have a whole entire lifestyle that they're involved in. And so people tend to imagine a bunch of rules, or they tend to imagine when I walk in, I have to play, or they imagine they're going to automatically get play. And I think it's important to realize that you're going to meet a group of people like you. You have an interest to go see and experience and explore this kind of alternative lifestyle that people have read about through various ways, or seen or explored or saw on TV or whatever. So they got to have an expectation to meet the people, not meet like the sex, or not meet the action that they saw. Because I've discovered the most success with people when I brought them to a space that I work, like every Wednesday night in San Francisco. I work at a nightclub. I own a nightclub actually called Bondage A Go-Go. And it's a bar and a play space and a dance club all at once. And people come in and they kind of expect this, like, awesome, I'm going to immediately get this dirty stuff done. And it's like, no, not really. Come and explore and hang out and ask questions. And then come back.
You don't get to just walk in and then you do the BDSM. You gotta go through a couple more steps first.
Right, and I think that's an important expectation to give people, whereas when you go to a conference, right, you're like, well, I know what I'm getting into. There's events and there's a dungeon play and there's classes, so I can choose my level of activity that way. But when you go to a dungeon or someone's play party, those things are not always publicly listed what happens. But you have to have a level of trust to meet the people. You have to have a level of trust to meet the people. There's no secret handshake really, other than being kind and being smart and being inclusive and not having an expectation that you're going to walk in the door and everything is going to suddenly happen to you.
Setting realistic expectations is so important, because you're, like you said, you're not going to just walk in and have everything happen to you. Gotta do a few more steps first. So what I want to talk about next is when you are actually at the dungeon and maybe you've been there for a couple times, or you've gone to a munch and you've met people. How do you get ready to take that next step between just observing to actually participating and interacting with people that maybe you want to do scenes with, or be mentored by, or learn from in some way, or do kink with in some way?
I would second what Stefanos said in terms of, connecting with people as people first, and not as, it doesn't matter when you enter the dungeon. If my profile says on FetLife, I'm Grand Mistress, Second Archon, High Poobah, Fire Dragon, and his profile says he's lowly slave worm dick, like, we still enter the space.
Just gotta know.
We still enter the space as equals, and we interact on that level. And so getting to know people as people and not as their roles, because until we've negotiated a power dynamic between us, we're coming into this space just as people. And all the social rules that we've learned our entire lives still apply. There's even like a few extra rules when you're in a public play space, a lot of times around touching. People have a lot more kind of personal space because they might be vulnerable. They might be, people are nude, which changes your physical boundaries. People might have just gotten done doing something intense. So, asking before touching and kind of giving people that personal space is extremely important in a public play space. And so getting to know people as people, Stefanos and I are always a huge fan of volunteering as a way to get involved and start to meet people. And then, once you've got those pieces in place, you've spent some time getting to know people, you've spent some time volunteering, then, asking people to play is kind of the next step of that. And I find it's very helpful to have a concrete idea of, what you might want to do. And compliments are always a good thing, as long as they're sincere, right? Like the compliment of this cheesy pickup lines or, giving the same compliment to 10 people in a row is not really going to suit your purposes. But, if you wanted to play with someone, there's probably, a reason why. So if you can include that in the ask, I feel like that can be very effective. So something along the lines of, I've seen you playing in the dungeon. I love the way you flog in time with the music. It's really, sensual, and I love that rhythm. If you're interested, I would love to negotiate a flogging scene with you. And so that kind of communication where you're kind of giving someone an idea, like, why do you want to play with them? And that can be more effective, I think.
I also think that people, without that information that Shay just gave about, witness something and then give someone the information, I think some people walk into the play space, and this has happened to me quite a bit. Again, I'll reference Bondage a Go-Go or other parties that I've hosted where someone will walk up and say, I want to play with you. And you say, oh, awesome. That sounds great. What would you like to do? And the person sort of stands there and says, well, I don't know, whatever you want. And then you end up in
Oh
that weird
no.
space. We end up in that weird space that everybody ends up in. You're like, what kind of dinner do you want tonight? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's food. What do you want? Well, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I was hoping you had an idea. And then it goes nowhere and it's frustrating. And so it's really important to have this sort of idea. And then going back a little bit in Shay's conversation about volunteering, I think one of the things I've witnessed a lot that happens is there's, the really introverted people and the really extroverted people, to sort of pick the kind of extremes. If you're a really introverted person, volunteering helps a lot. I've discovered from over my years, and a really introverted person will volunteer in some way. It gives them a job. It gives them a task. Shay well, still is very introverted, but you meet her in public, you wouldn't think so.
It's very true.
What I'm getting at is when we first got to the scene, Shay would volunteer at, say, the door or somewhere around the food area so that she would be constantly involved in connecting with people. And then as her involvement would increase, she would be forced to meet people. And it was a place that she was like, well, I need to do this because then I can meet people. Mm-hmm. And then on the opposite end, extremely extroverted people. I had this problem. I'm one of those extremely extroverted people. And what would happen to me is I would be so confident about my introductions and about the way I spoke and the way I wanted to, it would put people off.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big personality, right? I've always kind of been that way, even, as a younger person. And so what would happen is you come in and you come on really strong, and then that immediately can set off people's radar/red flags and go, well, I don't know, this person, is really confident and maybe too confident. So you got to kind of find that happy medium to sort of just meet people as people. That's kind of how that goes back to it. So being the wallflower doesn't help, but being the gigantic extrovert also is not exactly perfect yet. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. I definitely, I like the suggestions, especially for being an introvert and how to get involved in the local community and volunteering and having a job independent from, just having a task you can focus on while allowing yourself to be able to meet people in a structured way. Like for me, I'm also very introverted, and I really struggled when I was getting involved in my local community. I've gone between two of them, and basically what I had to do is I just kind of dove right in and just sat next to people that I thought looked interesting and friendly, and like people that I would have something in common with, and kind of just start a conversation and just spend time listening to them first and then introducing myself and then getting to know them that way. But what I would like to note is, or not but rather, but ask about is, besides the introvert extrovert difference, do you notice any difference in submissive versus dominant or top versus bottom in terms of how people approach or how to successfully approach others?
I think that's an interesting question for sure. When you enter the scene, as we had mentioned, we think it's super important to, leave the roles aside as you're meeting people, connect to people as equals. But there's definitely still going to be some of those dynamics in the background. And I think it would be, irresponsible of me to not acknowledge kind of that power dynamic that can happen. And, we've seen some dynamics with the community where there's been problematic consent issues and things like that around these kind of unacknowledged power dynamics that are always there for various reasons, whether across like axes of people who are more marginalized, or, there's definitely an underlying, way where it can feel, coercive in various ways. Whether it's because I'm a woman and a man's asking me to play and I feel, intimidated, or I feel like I have a hard time saying no because of, various societal reasons. And so that can be really difficult to navigate, especially in a kink scene. You're adding like this extra layer of possible power dynamics. When Stefanos and I entered the scene, it was in Minnesota, 2003, 2004. And one of the things we were taught that I haven't seen taught elsewhere, but it definitely made an impression on us, was that our mentor, Kurobin, at the time, really impressed on us that in that community, the norm was that dominants did not ask submissives to play because it was seen as inherently coercive, that there could be some power dynamic at play, even without either party intending it, where, the person would feel that they couldn't say no, or that it was harder to say no. So the dominants waited for submissives to ask them to play. And that was very much the expectation. And that was how we were taught when we first entered the scene. I don't think that that's uniform. I think that was, when I bring that up to people, people are kind of surprised by that. But that was very much our learning environment. So I think there's ways to make your communication less coercive, regardless of your role. The whole concept of, if you're interested, I would love to play, and, making openings for someone and really paying attention to soft no's, which, depending on our role, we may be more comfortable giving like oh, well, I'm not really sure, which should be taken as a no versus, an enthusiastic yes.
I think also, looking back at the top bottom, dominant submissive kind of section, and we've already hit a bunch on the be a human before you are the role, and we already acknowledged that there's these intersections where there's a natural tendency to want to be, submissive and say, oh, well, someone wants to, so I should say yes. I think what's important there is that on both ends of these perspectives, there needs to be room and education and power to understand that both sides get to say no, that both sides are encouraged and are respected for saying no as much as they are yes. We all like to joke about being the slutty slut and all the things that we do and whatever have you, but it needs to be recognized that no is important. And so on my side of the equation, often I'm seen as sort of a dominant or a top. When I play, although I switch, this is often the role that people see me in, and I make sure that people understand that no is an appropriate response to everything that is being talked about. And I verbally will say that. Someone will maybe approach me to play, and I will say, that sounds great. Here's what I love to do. But remember, you don't have to do any of these things. You can bring up your own idea. And if none of this, a lot of people also assume that when you start talking about playing, that if someone says no, it's a bad situation. It's not a bad situation. It's actually successful.
Because you communicated. Look at that.
Exactly, right. And when someone says no, I've asked people to change the way they look at it. Don't think of it as being rejected. Think of it as learning something about what you know and what they know. And that's okay. And so if you create the environment where no is okay and is successful, then you get rid of an awful lot of strange expectations that are laid out on people all the time that, well, that person always says no, so why should anybody approach them? Perhaps they're saying no because it's the same thing over and over and over. Maybe I don't want to give you a blowjob tonight or ever. Yeah, maybe I just don't like giving blowjobs, which is not true. I love giving them. But let's just imagine for a minute that that's what I want to, I don't want to do that. I'm a cock slut when one's presented. But the point is, I think giving people the opportunity to say no and building that around you. And so earlier you said you would sit next to people and you would, introduce yourself to those people. You had already entered a space where your people are. And so I would encourage people to enter a space where no is respected and is considered successful.
That's a really good point, is cultivating a space where no is okay and no isn't shameful. And I think we're getting there. I think, especially in the BDSM community, I think we're really starting to recognize the importance of not just giving permission to say no and saying you can say no, but also just encouraging that as being an okay thing, being a good thing, because that meant you were standing up for yourself, you were standing up for your boundaries, you were clearly communicating with somebody and making your wishes known. And that is always a good thing. And that being rejected doesn't have to be the outcome of the situation. It's just, hey, you learn something about you, about the person, and about the situation.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like, we've all had that situation where either we rejected someone who asked us to play, or we were rejected when we had asked someone to play. And a lot of times it's not about you. Like, if you think to win those situations, like, when did I reject someone? And was it because I didn't like them personally? A lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's, I was really tired. I had a headache. I had cramps. I had to leave because my ride was leaving. There can be so many reasons that, rejection, it's not always about you. Most of the time, it's probably external factors. That being said, sometimes rejection is about you. And if you're getting rejected repeatedly, maybe, have a good friend kind of give you an accountability moment of why is this happening and what can I do to improve my social skills or improve what I have to offer, which is kind of another point of meeting people is, your first step is like be where people you want to meet are. And then after that, you want to cultivate, what skills can you bring to the table? And this applies from both sides of the power dynamic, as it were. There's plenty of submissive or bottoming skills that you can bring, that you can offer. There's plenty of dominant or topping skills that you can bring and offer. But if you've become an expert at rope from either side, I think, that's a skill in the community that people look for and that they look for in a play partner. And so skills like that can really also help in terms of, meeting people and connecting for play.
I think it's important that people often, Shay and I have spoke about this for a while. I don't know how long. I know it's more than a year. Let's go with that, maybe 3, about making sure that there are actually bottoming skills recognized as well. So primarily when I go away from my hometown, I very seldom will bottom because I, am choosy and picky and I'm, kind of a snot that way sometimes. But one of the things I look for is people who have that ability, that have those skills and that can represent those skills. So, the rope bottoming skills that Shay talked about, and people often, really tend to think that most of the skills have to lie on the toppy dominant side. And the truth is, well, I'm, need to know how to use a toy as a top to play with you. Certainly I need to be competent in its use to be successful, unless we're doing lab time together where you're teaching me how to use this toy on you as an example, which by the way, I highly recommend for those of you listening. If you as a top have an excellent bottom, listen to them and let them teach you what is right as opposed to you assuming otherwise. But I think it's important to understand that bottoms have an awful lot of skills that they have to offer, including the way they communicate, the way they use their body in response to the things, in response to the toys and the sensations, the limits that they've learned, the ways in which they can communicate to continue things moving forward. Because oftentimes as a top, you end up getting a little lost sometimes, and it's actually the other partner that gives you back what you needed, that kind of guides you back into the scene. And people tend to have, when they first come into the scene, they tend to have this notion that as a submissive, I'm going to be led to the right thing, and as a top, I'm going to always know what to do. Neither of these are true statements. We are entering into a partnership, even if it is for the next half an hour or the next lifetime. And so when you recognize it as a partnership as opposed to 2 separate roles, then it's a thing. I mean, Shay and I have a partnership. We happen to also be legally married and we happen to have children. Okay, that's great. And in that context of things, we are partners. So there's no reason to assume that once we enter BDSM land, our partnership can't happen. And people can sometimes have that misconception that there's not really a partnership. It's just this, top and bottom, and I have a role over here and I have a role over here, and nigh shall the 2 cross or be understood, and the bottom can't possibly lead and the top can never get lost, and that's so wrong.
Honestly, sometimes I struggle to kind of even internalize where that idea comes from, because it just, I understand, I guess, why people might think that, but it's kind of ignorant to how humanity works. Like, dominants are not these perfect, all-knowing, omnipotent beings that always know the exact direction that both parties need to go in, and submissives are not these, like, docile, complacent, clueless, like, things that need to be led along the right path, otherwise they won't know what to do on their own, or they don't have any good independent ideas. And I think thinking about a relationship or thinking about somebody you're thinking about doing a scene with or a potential partner as it being a partnership, like what I normally say is you don't give up any power until you've negotiated to do so. Like you're negotiating from a place of being equals. You are communicating from a place of being equals. Your roles, being submissive or dominant or top or bottom or whatever you prefer to call yourself, shouldn't impact how you negotiate a relationship or how you negotiate for something, because you haven't given up any power yet. You're talking about how it's going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I would say
this. We each have a responsibility to what we're doing. So I have a responsibility to understand that I have chosen to take the top role, and in that process there's part of a contract, essentially a social contract, that means to be responsible as the top and maybe perhaps we've negotiated the leader in this thing. I must listen to you, the person who is bottoming to me. So I must listen to you, and therefore I am trusting that you have the same level of understanding of responsibility of your side of the equation, that because I trust you, then you should know I will listen to you and listen to your communication and listen to what you are offering me. And so the only power then I actually have is that we both trust each other and trust each other to be responsible for what we have offered. And as your relationship grows, then what you actually have is you have this there's an assumed responsibility. Not that these things can't change, they can, but you can have a sort of an assumed responsibility that goes back and forth. And that's how that trust builds. And so people see that trust when they first walk into the scene. Like they'll see Shay and I doing like really crazy, stupid things sometimes to some people. Some people are like, that's really dumb. But to Shay and I, it's not dumb, it's normal, right? Having a kiddie pool with a bunch of blood in the bottom of it and, rope everywhere and scalpels and all, and people are like, that's crazy. And we're like, well, that's Tuesday night.
Yeah, exactly.
But in that sense, we have built that level of being responsible for our part of the equation and having trust in the other person's responsibility back for what they're giving. And I think once you take that understanding, it goes further. So Shay, you had a point I hopefully I didn't stomp on.
Oh, no, you're great. I think you're making a very complimentary point. I would just add that we frequently will talk about doing a kink scene as having an analogy to dancing, where you have both partners participating. And we do a demo in one of our classes where we have Stefanos try to lift me up. And, if I'm like fighting him and not letting myself be lifted up and doing like the toddler thing of like putting myself on the ground and really like, you're not going to pick me up. Like he can pick me up. He can, muscle through it. He's a lot larger than I am, but it's definitely not graceful. And it definitely isn't, a fun experience for either of us, unless that's like the dynamic you're going for. But in terms of a dance, and if I'm just not helping him, once again, he can pick me up, but it's not, going to actually have a flow to it. And we finally, we will demo where I'm participating with him and, working with him to get in the air. And that's when you can really connect with each other. And I think if you watch people dance, it seems like the person, if you're watching someone do a lift and lift their partner up, it can seem like the person doing the lifting is the one doing the lion's share of the work. But if you've ever done partner dancing, you know that that's not true at all. The person who's being lifted is actively working, is participating in this, and is at least an equal partner in that lift happening. And so that's true of the scene. And that's true of when you're playing in a kinky sense as well. It can look like the top or the dominant is doing the most work, in air quotes, but really the other partner is participating in a lot of ways that are perhaps a little more subtle and nuanced.
I think that's very true. And I mean, I'm speaking as someone who identifies as a submissive. I don't switch, so I don't have any experience being on the other side of the slash. But I would say my experience is very much like that, where you are doing a lot of work,
Yes.
and a lot of it is very invisible. But that's sort of part of it. Is it's like ice skating, right? It seems really effortless, but then when you actually figure out how it's done, you're like, oh no, this isn't, I'm not just laying there and then something's happening to me. It's like an actively working with your partner, and that's how you make good scene energy. I did want to go back, if we can, and briefly get to something in terms of the conversation around rejection and saying no. And in particular, if you do experience a no or you do experience rejection, how do you react to that in a positive way? Like how do you manage or practice being able to accept that positively, and where do you go from there? If you are rejected, do you approach them later at a different time? Do you leave it alone, or does it depend on the nature of why the no is given?
I want to help with something. Sorry I stuttered there, but I want to help with something first. I like to put rejection in context when I think about it for myself, and I've explained this to people before. So as an example, you get rejected at, say, a restaurant or a bar, as an example, when you order a thing and they tell you they don't have it. Okay? And so now you are experiencing a rejection that's not personal and not coming from another person. But often when that happens to you, you're like, well, okay, and it hurts. It sucks. It's the thing you came there for. That's true. It's the thing you wanted. You had an expectation that you expected to be met. Why? Because it's a restaurant or a bar, as an example, and these are things they should always have. Why would they possibly run out of my favorite grilled cheese sandwich? At that moment, you experience a type of emotion that comes with it. Often it is like a frustration or a sadness. And then the server usually looks at you and says, hey, I'll come back in a minute and check. Maybe you can find an alternative. Let's say they walk off. And so you start thinking about an alternative. Okay. And in your brain, you have found an alternate method now here to feel accepted at this restaurant and to feel that as though you can get something that you want from the restaurant or the bar. Or your other option is to say, I'm going to go to a different bar or a different restaurant to get the grilled cheese that they have because I really know that they have another good one. In either way, you've dealt with the rejection. So when you add a human into it, it gets more complicated. But if you can help contextualize that rejection, I have just asked you for my grilled cheese sandwich, Evie. Okay. And you don't like the way I eat it. Okay. I'm sloppy. I'm messy. The cheese is stuck in my goatee. That's just wrong. So we're out of grilled cheese sandwiches for Stefanos today. I need to understand that there may be an alternative depending on how you told me that. Like, as an example, are you telling me the kitchen's closed? Or are you telling me that there's no grilled cheese? Which means, are you telling me I can't spank you, but I can do this other thing? Or are you telling me there's no scene, put your toy bag away? Okay. And so in that moment, I have the similar response to the restaurant. It's just more personal. And so you have to contextualize it and say, okay, I can't have my grilled cheese sandwich. Maybe I can find a different grilled cheese sandwich I'll like. In that case, I think that's a really simplistic way and maybe a little bit out of context for some people to recognize. But there's a lot of ways in which we experience rejection constantly in the world, and people don't like to think of that because BDSM is so personal, just like any relationship, like sex, like emotional connection. It gets really deep into your heart. But if you haven't really even connected with that person entirely, well, I think in some cases for pickup play, what you're connecting with is the item or is the intention, right, that you have. And if someone rejects your intention, it feels very personal. But I think you need to understand that that rejection is because they simply don't have it. Sorry, a little philosophical, but there you go.
Yeah, it's not that the restaurant's closed, it's that the restaurant's not open. There is no food here. It will not be served. Please do not come back.
Yeah, well, and it's the difference between, never come back to this restaurant again, or we don't have grilled cheese today, but maybe I can, I would love to serve you a bowl of soup or something like that, in terms of, can we find something that is compatible? And I've definitely had those conversations where, for example, I have a really good friend in the scene. He and we have some chemistry and we've talked about playing. And when we tried to connect about playing, we were having the conversation of like, hey, I would suggest, why don't we do some, rope? I really like suspension. And he would come back with, well, I'm not really into suspension. Why don't we do some rough body play? Like, I really like wrestling people. I really like that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh gosh, I really am not into rough body play. How about we do sensation play with like some really stingy, like single tails, light impact kind of thing? oh, well, on his side, I really like thuddy, heavy play. And we just went back and forth and back and forth. And finally we decided, like, there aren't actually areas of overlap here. I guess we should just stay friends and not play. And like Stefanos had said, framing that as a victory rather than a defeat, like, isn't it good that we found this out talking beforehand rather than get in the middle of a scene and be like, wow, this is not working. This isn't compatible. And now we've made things, we've had this issue with each other. So I would say, kind of taking that moment of finding compatibility and seeing it as a good thing if we can, come out of that, having learned something, having decided that, this isn't a person that I can connect with in this way, but maybe in this other way. One of the things that I pay a lot of attention to is not being coercive. I don't ask people to play very often for a number of reasons. One of them is because I'm usually presenting at an event. And there's been a lot of discussion in the kink community about the kind of status that presenters can have and the ways in which that can be misused or even abused in terms of how presenters relate to attendees. So it's something that I have a lot of concern about. And even locally, when I ask people to play, if I get anything other than an enthusiastic yes, like I'm looking for that enthusiastic, yes, I would love to. And anything short of that is, really not, I want that enthusiastic consent. So if it's anything other than, yes, I'd really love to, let's make a time, let's plan it, and really someone engaging and participating, a lot of times I will leave the door open for them to come to me. Like, I've expressed that I'm interested in this. If you're interested, I'll be in the play space all night, come and find me. I have my toy bag, I'd be happy to chat later if you're interested. And then leave, and leave the door open for them to come back. But, I'm not here looking to have a scene with somebody who isn't enthusiastic about having a scene with me. I want there to be that reciprocal interest on both sides, of course. And so I think that that's a really important skill to learn. If you're rejected, leave the door open, come if you feel like, you change your mind, or if something's different later, you can come to me, but not like pursuing someone. You want to really pay attention to those, soft no's, and pay attention to whether you're getting like enthusiastic consent to continue the interaction or to continue, a play kind of negotiation.
Because you don't want to be creepy and you don't want to be coercive. Because the last thing that you want is like, and even if you're in a situation where you maybe not realize it, but you wear somebody down to give you a yes because you just asked so much, even if you end up having a scene, it's probably not going to be the kind of scene you want to have, because there's probably not going to be a lot of great energy coming from that other person because they just got wore out by you asking so much.
Yeah, and that's like, it's so problematic. And, we really want to move towards an environment where we're giving, affirmative consent and making sure that we're not, coercive. Like, I don't want to have a scene because I wore you down and nagged you until you did it. Like, that's not right. That's not what I want. So yeah, kind of that environment, I think, is really important. And understanding, a lot of times rejection isn't about you. A lot of times it's just not the right time. And if you can focus on making friends, there's plenty of people I've met in the scene where I didn't necessarily think we would connect as play partners. But, as we get to know each other and get to see each other play and have multiple different interactions as friends, eventually we end up playing. Or maybe not. And it's important to not have like a, goal in mind with that, make friends for the sake of making friends. And, some of those connections, maybe they connect you with their other friend. And then now you've kind of made a mutual connection, which can make it a lot easier to meet people. So all of that plays in, I think.
The other comment that Shay made about a friend introducing you to a friend, I have been very lucky in numerous ways with this particular process. So I'm at a party, I'm at a convention, I'm doing my thing. I meet someone, we start chatting. It sort of turns to play, more like flirting. We're not really trying to play with each other. We're just talking about things we like to do. And that person and I kind of realize we're probably not going to try to negotiate a scene. It's just not working because we listen to each other's soft no's. And then that person says, "Oh my God, you know what you should do because you love knives and humiliation, Stefanos?" I'm like, "What?" Like, "You should go ask so and so to play. They're a friend of mine. Can I talk to them for you?" And suddenly I'm able to play with another person, and then I can come back to that mutual friend we now have. And, that dynamic is important. And so even though I was kind of rejected there, and I like to point out to people with pickup play especially, oftentimes it's the intention that's rejected and not necessarily the individual. Like Shay says, it's not you. I mean, sometimes I go to a dungeon not to play. I go to hang out and be around my people, right? And if I'm in a dungeon to not play and I'm approached, I'm going to reject everybody. Okay. I'll even reject Shay if she shows up. Right. And so I'll even reject Shay if she shows up if I'm in a space to say no. So the point is you got to remember that sometimes people are there, and that's why it's so hard for people to work on rejection. Is you have to remember what you're rejecting and what was rejected. I may not have been rejected. My offer was. That doesn't mean I'm a terrible person yet. Or ever,
Yeah.
Right. And at conferences, it's a little bit different. Like, where for KinkFest, for example, they have classes during the day, which can be kind of a great opportunity. Some classes are a bit more social, so you can go to the class and possibly, connect with some people, meet the people who are sitting around you. When classes are more hands-on, like, maybe you're going to connect with someone and, tie them in the class or something like that. So some classes you can, meet people in that way. There's some social spaces. Sometimes there's some social events during the day. And so that can help a lot, like the conference environment. One thing a lot of people will do for conferences too is like KinkFest, for example, has a FetLife group, and people will go on the FetLife group. A lot of times there's a big thread of, looking to meet someone for play, post on this thread, and people will post like, I'm interested in bottoming for XYZ or topping for ABC. Contact me if you're interested in doing those things. And that can be a super successful strategy, like, making a few tentative plans beforehand. Obviously, you want to screen people if you just met them on the internet, but, connecting with people and kind of getting a few connections in that sense and preparing like a few people that you want to talk to and negotiate in person further can sometimes help, especially if you're someone who's more shy with meeting people. So, the internet is amazing. Like sometimes you can make some connections that way that turn into play at an event, especially a conference like KinkFest, where a lot of people are coming single. A lot of people are coming looking to connect, looking to play. Like people, some people just want to watch, but a lot of people want to participate and they want to get into it. So it's just a matter of connecting with those people. And it can sometimes be easier to do that, or at least put some of the foundation in place online than in person.
I know from when I've gone to KinkFest and some other conventions, or even just like local smaller events, like if there's a big group outing, like a big summer kinky camping trip, it can be really successful actually, not even just to wing it and meet people there, but post something specifically of, hey, I'm going to be single, or maybe you're not single, but you're still available for play. And this is what the kind of thing you're looking for. And then, hey, shoot me a message, or walking around the convention floor with maybe like information about like your FetLife name or something. So that way people can contact you if they meet you, and talk about play, between classes or something if you're not able to otherwise meet up. But I think that can be a great tool for introverts too, because online interaction just seems to be a lot easier
Yes.
for introverts than face to face. And especially if you're the person who maybe does struggle with communicating and not instantly falling into your DS roles, doing that over the internet may be a better neutral space, because you're not having to overcome body language or overcome like being overpowered by a really like forceful personality, or somebody who's like a foot and a half taller than you are, and trying to feel like you are able to negotiate for yourself as adequately as you can.
Which you brought up a really great point right there. Size in personality, in meeting personally. It's a thing that I think people need to remember. It's an important process of it. I try not to stay standing when having a negotiation with someone who I outsize. I mean, I'm nearly 6'2", 240 pounds. I'm a big person. I can almost palm Shay's face. Okay, and my other my other partner, literally, I can go from her belly button to her, almost her neck with one of my hand spans. I'm aware that I'm very big and that can be intimidating. And I think it's important when you're communicating with people that you try to level as many of those unspoken power dynamics that our lives have built us to.
Mm-hmm.
Shay mentioned presenter things. I'm a presenter also. People know me from porn. People have seen me throw parties. People have seen me teach other classes. That they have a built-in expectation. And when someone has a built-in expectation, that needs to be worked down a little bit in order for it to be an equal communication. And the person who has more power or more privilege because of the station they hold needs to remember that and tone it down and go make an effort to tone it down and to acknowledge the privilege as well, if you can. And I think that's an important thing. Anyway, you had another question for letting me jump on that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Thank you for contributing your thoughts on that, because I think it's something, especially in the last year, 2 years, I think the community is really starting to realize all of these nonverbal cues that we give each other when we communicate that maybe we're not aware of. But what I would like to wrap this up on is, or not necessarily wrap it up, but one thing I want to make sure we get to before the end of this is when you are negotiating for pickup play or meeting somebody you're potentially interested in playing with, when you are communicating, not even necessarily during the negotiation phase, but even when you're just talking with somebody, what are some things that might come up that you might consider for red flags, or things that you should be on the lookout for in somebody's language, or how they talk about kink, or how they talk about their play, that maybe might give most people pause, that may mean that they're an unsafe player or somebody that you're not going to be compatible with?
That's a difficult one. And the reason why I say that is because it's obviously very personalized. I think let's make an assumption, and then maybe we can answer the question more clearly. So now let's imagine that these people don't know each other. And let's imagine it's at a conference. Okay. So if we imagine that, I would take a weird red flag moment from someone insisting that I only play with them in their room alone. Because I'm at a conference and I'm in a public play space and I want to go play in the public play space. And that might be a little bit disconcerting to me since I don't know them. You understand? So that might be a moment to say, if that's crossing one of your boundaries, to make sure that you can pay attention to that. That's kind of an important process there. I think another one, obviously we've spoken a lot about coercion. Shay and I do a role playing one. Let's see if I can cue her to remember it as I just give her context clues for fun here. So Shay's carrying a rope bag in the Kinkfest dungeon, let's imagine, and I don't know Shay, and I walk up and I look at the scene of someone doing a cool suspension, and I make a comment like, "Wow, that's really hot." Shay looks over at me and says something like, "Oh, hey, I do suspension. You want to suspend with me?" This is a great start. But as I start asking, let's say again, we're going to imagine it's Shay. "Oh, really, Shay? That's cool. Like, who taught you?"
Oh, well, I mean, I've been doing this forever. Obviously, everyone knows how awesome I am.
Well, sure, but who taught you?
Well, I mean, I've learned from a lot of different people. I've learned from some really important rope people. Why don't we just, start to hang the point, and, we can talk about it as we go.
So you see right here, what's happening is the avoidance of questions and answers. This should be a red flag for anybody, no matter what the question is. I mean, obviously, in this case, Shay's character is avoiding answering where they learned because maybe perhaps they don't really want to explain that it was not from a reputable structure or whatever. And I think it's important at this point, they're avoiding.
But yeah, I think, how people respond to, respectful questions is really important to kind of start reading into. So, if I'm asking someone, how did you learn about this type of play? How long have you been doing it? What kind of safety supplies do you have? If I'm asking these questions and getting a lot of pushback, then that definitely would be a red flag to me. People who don't have anything nice to say about ex-partners or who can't give me any references. I mean,
Yes, yeah, it's a big red flag for me.
yeah, so that's never good. And so I think those are some of them.
Also, one of the questions I like to ask, and I actually like asked of me, is what horrible thing did you do and how did you recover in regards to whatever we're talking about playing with. So when you ask that question, and I like to actually ask it of the people I'm going to play with, regardless of the role we're taking in the scene. Because sometimes when you go do a thing, whatever it may be, an action, an activity in BDSM, the recovery process is really important if you have made a mistake. And so, another red flag I look for, I use this one as an example of, trust me, I've never left a mark on anybody that didn't want one. So hyperbolic statements like that, insisting that they can be basically perfect, is kind of a scary one. I've overheard and witnessed in negotiations with people saying things like, I don't mark anybody with my single tail ever, or I can do a cutting that'll heal in 3 days, or these kinds of comments. This won't leave a scar, don't worry, or I can do rope without leaving compression marks. I think as soon as you start hearing these kinds of overconfident words from tops, as an example, you should take a red flag to it. Often I take red flags from bottoms, as an example, the people that are receiving all the sensation. Things like, I can do anything, and I'll follow down that rabbit hole of questions to find out what anything is. Often
I have no limits.
Right, or I can take a lot. These are moments where when people say hyperbolic statements, I like to follow down that path and see what they mean. And sometimes their answers can be red flags. They're initially a place for me to turn and follow the conversation, because oftentimes I've met people who said, I have a huge pain tolerance. And we start playing, and I realize their version of a huge pain tolerance is not the same as mine in both directions. I mean, I've hit people very lightly and they've screamed red. And I've played with people who were, say, forest firefighters and lived in a punk mosh pit, who I simply could not hit hard enough. I mean, like, I had a play partner, Shay knows this, when you were there for it. I simply could not hit this person hard enough. And I'm a trained martial artist. I just the partner was, literally turned around and asked me, is that all I've got? So,
and not even in a bratty way, just sincerely. Like,
yeah.
Can you do more?
Right. So I think when you're negotiating, the kind of hyperbolic statements, those hyperbolic statements need to be followed up by the other partner, and then those answers can become a red flag or not. So I think there's not necessarily like a quick red flag, that I think about right away, but I do think about ways in which we're communicating that are.
Because so much of it is context based. Yeah, that does help.
Thank you so much for letting us continue down all these different rabbit holes of conversation and continuing on. So it has been quite fun so far to do this with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I like going down the rabbit hole parts, because I think that's where you get a lot of the most interesting points, rather than just like sticking like, okay, no, we had 5 minutes to talk about this, we gotta move on. Because I think the organic conversation, you get the best results out of, you get the most interesting information. Did you guys have anything else that you wanted to contribute to this topic before we wrap it up today?
I just wanted to, I guess, mention really quickly, since we started on this because of Kink Fest. So, I want to plug Kink Fest in the way of, like, I really sincerely, it's one of my favorite events. We love presenting there. We've been there multiple years. It's a huge conference in relation to, all of the other conferences that we've been to. It's definitely one of, like, the biggest few in the United States anyway. And their dungeon is amazing. So I want to, put out there, it's a fantastic play space. They spend a bunch of time and energy. They have huge production value for the play space. They really light it. They have amazing PlayStations. It's a big open space. You can kind of look out and see everyone playing, and everyone's energy comes together. And so even if you're just, coming to Kink Fest just to watch, just to go to some classes and learn, it's really incredible and definitely worth coming to. They spend just a lot of attention and thought on how they lay out the play spaces, and it's really amazing what they do. They have great volunteers. It's so much work putting together a conference like that. So if you come, like, please give the volunteers love and let them know how much you appreciate them, because it's just, there's so much invisible work that happens to make these conferences successful. And I have so much appreciation for the people who put together Kink Fest. They do a really amazing job. And Stefanos and I have traveled around to, dozens of different conferences. And there's only a few that we keep coming back to. And Kink Fest is one of them because they are really incredible people and they put on a really amazing event.
They listen also. I think that's
Yes.
a very important part when they listen and have respect for not only, say, the presenters that come out, which is amazing, and that's a really good thing. They also listen to the people who come to the event, and they give them the respect about the opinions they have. So if you are an attendee and something is up, something is off or different, and you approach the volunteer staff or the organizers, they actually will listen to you and use that information, for awesome, as opposed to, anything negative. And I think that's a really important process. They've done a really great job. I mean, Shay praises the play space, which so do I. There are lots of play spaces we've seen, and KinkFest obviously spends the most time in that. But I think also like the way in which they organize their classes and seeing what they can do to get their attention to making sure there's enough vendors, and putting the vendors in a place that the vendors feel also seen and welcomed, as opposed to far off in the far side of the land.
Yeah, each with their own individual hotel room. You can't see them in.
Correct. And I understand when you hold a hotel conference, sometimes that's what you've got to do. But I think KinkFest does a really good job of representing all the different groups that are present. And I also like that they create a community space and a community room for people to do their own thing and to meet with littles, or meet with a pet play thing, or have a master slave discussion, or have a decompression room where you can sit and play board games with people, and create these other sided spaces that you get to enjoy to kind of pull away from the conference. Because sometimes the conference can be overwhelming to people. It's 800 to 1,000 people, all kinky all the time. That's a lot for some people to absorb.
I think they actually, I don't know if it was, they had a room, or at least they had an introvert, they had a decompression quiet space. So if you were getting overwhelmed, you could go there. And I think that's awesome, because there are a lot of introverted kinky people, even the ones who like to play publicly, and having somewhere where you can go and just be zen and quiet for a moment without having to drive back to your hotel room is awesome.
Yes, absolutely. I remember them having that at KinkFest, and it is just really an example of how they're very thoughtful with how they've laid things out and the resources that they have for people. And it's a really incredible event, and we love going there every year.
Also, since I know that we're ending this thing, and anything else you want to say, as obligatory as it may seem, it's required. I assure you it is not when I say this. Thank you for taking your time to not only do this moment where we've been together for about an hour in a podcast, but all the communication that came before it, reaching out to the process and coming up with thoughtful and meaningful questions to ask people and giving them the space for the answers. So thank you for providing this environment for not just Shay and I, but for many others to come, and those that, are now broadcasting with us. So thank you so very much for your time, energy, and your thoughtfulness in this process.
Oh, thank you. I'm really glad again to have both of you guys on. I'm grateful for KinkFest for allowing me to be able to set this up and facilitating it. I'm really looking forward to going to KinkFest again. It is marked on my calendar. I got my vacation days ready. I can't wait. And thank you guys so much for being on. For you guys who are listening in real time to this on YouTube, leave any comments or questions that you have for Shay and Stefanos or myself down below. To follow up on this particular topic. If you guys want to find more from Shay and Stefanos, do you guys have any links or websites or things that you would want to share to people can find more from you?
We have too many. Let's start with stefanosandshay.com. That's our main website. Shay is responsible for most of the content on all of our websites, including remedialropes.com and her new one that I highly support and am happy to have contributed to in a small way, selfsuspend.com as well. These are some of our passions and things that we're involved in. And of course, on both of those, there's ways to reach us on our social media and on Facebook and FetLife. Feel free to follow us all over the place. She is pretty much Shay Blondie everywhere, and I'm pretty much Stefanos or Maestro Stefanos everywhere.
All right. Well, thank you guys again so much. I can't thank you guys enough for taking time out of, I'm sure, very busy schedules to do this. We'll be at KinkFest if people are interested from learning more from you in person. You guys will be doing a class about how to do pickup play if people want to have a real life experience with you where they get to learn all of this and ask their own questions.
Great. Thank you so much.
Everyone should know we're really open to meeting people, so thank you so much.
Yes. All right. Well, I will be doing more interviews, of course, again, probably in the next few weeks. Everybody, if you're interested in finding that, please subscribe so you can find when that happens. It'll probably be in the next 2 weeks. And then every week during my live stream, I announce who the next person is going to be that I'm interviewing and the topic. So if you want to contribute to that, live stream is the best place to do it. And I will see you all again very soon. Links will be down in the description box for all the websites that Shay and Stefano mentioned and other resources and where to find KinkFest and get tickets and all that stuff. All right. Have a great day, guys.